We're here to explore Mike Oldfield's return to Ommadawn, his 2017 sequel to his classic 1975 recording, Ommadawn, and likely the final chapter of his recording career. And today, to discuss the record with us, we have Chris Dewey, the author of the book Mike Oldfield, A Life Dedicated to Music, and the editor of Dark Star, the long-running Mike Oldfield magazine. And we also have Markus Reuter, who's a world-renowned touch guitarist and composer and is part of the bands Stickman and Tuner. And he also holds his own Mike Oldfield podcast series called Except for the Sound of. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello.
Hey, Neil.
Well, before we begin and dive into Return to Ommadawn, I wanted to discuss an Amarok topic that emerged since we did our last roundtable. And several viewers pointed out that on the 2011 deluxe reissue of the Sally Angie's Children of the Sun, we have Mike performing an acoustic guitar medley called Branches that features several themes that would later emerge on Amarok. So the beginnings of that album go all the way back to 1968. In addition, it was pointed out that on the 2009 Super Deluxe reissue of Tubular Bells, we have demo material on it that would also ultimately end up on Amarok. I'm curious, what are your thoughts about the fact that the seeds of this record go much further back than anyone was previously aware of?
I don't think it's unusual actually for Mike to have ideas that he later revisits. And he probably thought with the Sally Angie that it perhaps didn't get that much of an audience. It was relatively successful at the time, but he probably felt that there were ideas there that he'd like to explore more. And it's things he's done many times. I mean, think of even things like the single Man in the Rain that came out in '98. He'd apparently been working on that for 15 years, this idea he'd had, and it had gone round his head, and he tried it in different guises, tried it with different vocalists. Apparently Barry Palmer had a go at singing it in the 80s. And it took a long time before that then came to fruition and developed into a track he was happy with. And maybe the same with Branches. It was an exploration of an idea, possibly, on the Sally Angie, and then he perhaps again it kind of went round his head and then later emerged and Amarok just became the right vehicle to deliver that, maybe.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it even sort of connects to the discussion about Return to Ommadawn that we're going to have later, because these themes played by Mike as a 14 or 15-year-old, they're extremely muscular. Like the Branches track, it has actually two motifs that reappear in Amarok, and I even wrote down the timings this time, but because I really wanted to know, and they appear. There's at least six appearances of those two themes in Amarok, so there is quite a relevance of uh, Mike kind of like that Branches track is what, as far as I can tell, a sound check for the recording of the Sally Angie album, and it's fascinating how incredibly muscular Mike already has been at that time to pull off that kind of uh, over-the-top expression, let's say, on an acoustic guitar, and probably wasn't the greatest acoustic guitar also, right? So it's really quite something. And then, yeah, in the context of Amarok, and yeah, we talked about that at length already, it's kind of like part of that collage, that idea of the collage, bringing back those old things, and I think it's pretty special. And yeah, and I think we also mentioned the Hoover section, which is actually part of those Tubular Bells demos that were released for the first time, I think, even in 2003, as bonus material for the on the DVD version of Tubular Bells 2003, as far as I know.
Hmm.
I'm not exactly sure, but I think that's been out there as well. Yeah.
Well, the interesting element is it also surely changes the perception of fans, and including some naysayers of Amarok, who basically speak about the record as if it was just a bunch of ideas thrown into a fan and then splattered on a wall. This is actually something that had gestated to a certain degree for a very long time.
Yes, and I was and we've been through this already, but the amazing thing about Amarok is that it's such a modular thing that now, when I was looking for the exact timings of these themes, right, and I started listening somewhere, and then I already heard it coming up, but between like the moment where I started listening and where the theme actually appeared, sometimes it was like a minute or two. Kind of, so I know the context of these little motifs where they appear, but then like the number of events that he's put into that short amount of time is just so fantastic, and it's kind of like a modular. It's like, yeah, we talked about it. It's sort of a much more of a, I don't know how to put it, because I think it's a great work to do something like that instead of just like thinking of all the elements like necessarily leading from A to B like linearly. So it's like very much a, a world of parallel themes and things that sort of like can be combined in many different ways. And I think that's what we all like about that record in the end.
Well, let's move on to the core topic at hand, which is, of course, return to Ommadawn. Chris, talk about the decision for Mike to return to the long form instrumental format again and to use Ommadawn as its basis.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've got to say we're kind of surmising because Mike didn't give many interviews about it. He didn't talk much about it. So we're in a position here where we're kind of almost left guessing in a way. So I think that makes this album a bit more difficult to talk about because of that. Um, but I think he'd reached a point where he'd become very comfortable in his life. You think back to his early days, and he was very troubled, and he was troubled with mental illness, and then later in his career, he had a lot of pressure from the record company, and by the time Return to Ommadawn had come out, he was very relaxed and very calm, and in his studio in the Bahamas, and didn't have the same pressures. He's very calm. I think relatively happy in his life, and kind of reached a point where he kind of reached where he wanted to be. So I think that kind of it helped him realize that his strength really was in the long form instrumental where he started, and the diversions he'd had on the way for great reasons, and with great results, um, had kind of taken him away from that core skill of the long form instrumental where he plays the instruments himself, and I think he just realized that this is what I do best, and I'm going to go full circle and return back to that. It is my view.
Well, Marcus, discuss the conception, construction, and instrumentation of this record and how it compares to the original.
Yes, let me add something to what Chris just said. So, Chris is absolutely right with that we don't really know that much about it. But there were some postings on the internet where Mike was sort of referencing different things he'd been working on at the time, and one of which was the album which became Man on the Rocks, and I remember he probably called Man on the Rocks the Stratocaster or the Telecaster album. Telecaster album, I think he called it on Facebook, something like that. Anyway, like my memory is not really good, or I don't remember exactly what it was all about. But like this, he had already settled in the Bahamas. He had his studio there, um, and I think, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a key event that led him to actually record Return to Ommadawn was the death of his son, Dougal. Um, and Mike mentioned that a couple times in interviews at the time. And
He did, yeah.
yeah, and to me, because I just listened to Return to Ommadawn again, and it just stopped 5 minutes before we started talking, and I was extremely emotional
Mm.
again listening to it, and I can't help but believe that that this record is for Dougal. I really think so, or at least because of that event, that emotional event for Mike. There are some reasons why I believe that I can go into detail later. I really don't see a Return to Ommadawn as a sequel to Ommadawn. I think that's it. It's okay that you use those words, Anil, but also depending on the definition of what we define as sequel. I think musically, it is something quite different. It's a different animal. It's yes, it's the same musician, the same person, but at a much later age, and kind of like drawing from a different, yeah, different understanding of the world and different experiences at that time. And I think that, the reason for calling it Return to Ommadawn was probably just because he was not really creative with with placing his work in the world, right? Like, um, and there are some interesting things where you can also see that he must have gone into this really without any preconception, and he came up with like the main theme that opens the album is something that he derived from working with the vocal chant of Ommadawn, the original of part one, and he cut that up into slices and rearranged that, and he actually left that original rearranged thing in Return to Ommadawn, and you can see that it's also like not perfectly edited, and it's really like with a little bit of like fade-ins and the beginnings of the word, so you can hear it's something that he tried to probably keep as an intuitive work process, and then he played this theme as on whistles to open the record. And even there already, like the whistles, like that sound, we know that from Hergest Ridge. So even like the opening section is not really like Ommadawn. So he does not really replicate the form in detail, the form of the original Ommadawn in detail. But then we have quite a few things that are like the finale is kind of like built on the same kind of idea with the percussion and a little bit of build up, but then it gives a drop that we don't have in the original. And I mean, I could go on and just to describe like the difference and the similarities. But overall, I have to say, I think it really, for me, it is not. It is. I wouldn't call it a sequel. It's in the name, but
Yeah, I've got to agree. I mean, this is a lot calmer than Ommadawn. It's a lot less frantic, and it's got a an almost melancholic beauty to it, which you didn't see in Ommadawn. That was very much a happier sounding record. There's sadness in Return to Ommadawn. You can feel that, and like you said, Marcus, when I listened to it, the first time I listened to it, I put it on, and I was in floods of tears. It just moved me so much. The sadness. The sadness is almost painful, almost like it's pleasure pain kind of. It's so
yes.
painful that it's joyous, and it sounds a bit odd, but hopefully you understand what I mean. But that isn't present in Ommadawn. But I think what is true is that he is kind of returning to that idea of hand-played instruments, long-form instrumental, Celtic influence. So there are some kind of high-level links, but the structure of it and the feel of it is very different. I have to agree. Yeah, definitely.
Eh, there is the theme, the guitar theme, the sort of shouting expressiveness that we find at the end of the original of part one of the original Ommadawn, which goes dip, right? That's really the theme. It just dip, right? He brings that back here in a kind of very similar way. However, and this is sort of like what is kind of like my theory about Dougal also, because there's a piece called Orabidu on 5 Miles Out, which I've always considered to be because that's like the year that Dougal was born, I think, or 81, 82, I'm not exactly sure, but that track Orabidu is sort of a lullaby, and if you listen to the end section of Orabidu, which is a variation of a theme from Tubular Bells, actually, the chord sequence from Tubular Bells, and he brings the theme in there. It's like it's very present there, like the whole melody of there. And so for me, for some reason, and also Crisis, the finale of Crisis is also in that category actually, with that theme and the strummed acoustic guitars and things. And there's something really powerful and nearing crisis. He didn't call that return to Ommadawn, you know, but and that's sort of like how I think of Return to Ommadawn somehow. It's sort of a collage and pastiche of things that most of them maybe are related to Ommadawn, but there are so many other references in there and cross references between multiple albums that really make this record so great. I really think it's great. I have to say the guitar performances are just outstanding, and I don't think that a lot of people are aware of that because Mike's virtuosity is not just in playing lots of notes or playing fast notes or something. There in the power of the expressiveness of his playing.
Mm.
And we already referenced the Branches track, you know, that reappeared in Amarok. As a 15-year-old, Mike was already a very strong and emoting in a very different way as a young boy, but now as a grown man, he has like this, and you put it really beautifully, Chris, like there's this deep sadness in it that really seems also like for me, like a summary sort of like of an artist going through life feeling misunderstood or feeling the weight of actually having the capability of creating such work. You know, all of that seems to be in that music, and it gives me
Mm.
goosebumps, you know, thinking about it, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 Well, during one of the few interviews he did give for the record, he said he had to bring his guitar chops back into shape. They had diminished. He had to practice like crazy.
Mhm.
Um, Marcus, what do you think he had to do to get back into virtuoso condition for this record?
Well, he just had to play. Really, I think that's what it is, you know. And with a person like Mike, nobody really knows anything about what he practiced or if he actually practiced at all. It's quite possible that his way of practicing was coming up with the tunes and then learning them and playing them. And there are some faster parts on the record, which sort of like are reminiscent of the bass part at the end of Tubular Bells Part One or Side One, which require a lot of dexterity and a power. But as I said, really like the biggest challenge would be to kind of like reacquire the calluses, both physically and emotionally, to play that stuff. And even when and this is like for me a typical Oldfield phenomenon or even principle that happens, like you hear the melodies and it sounds simple, it sounds there's a certain lightness of touch or of expression on top of the sadness, right? Like there's something really special about that, and it really requires a callous sing of one's technique, let's say. And yeah, I think he must have gotten that back just, you know, playing those parts over and over again. Unfortunately, not like the original Ommadawn, he would, you know, the tape would go bad after, you know, I don't know, 10, 12, 20 overdubs. Um, but he could do it over and over again, recording to Pro Tools or whatever he used. And yeah, so I think that his guitar technique is really, and the sound is just outstanding on this record.
I mean, we can't overlook the fact, of course, that, you know, like us all, he's getting older. And at the time he recorded that, he was into his mid 60s, early mid 60s. And no, we don't know, but, you know, perhaps his dexterity was not what it was as a younger man. You know, it's not an uncommon thing to lose dexterity in your fingers as you get older. So maybe that was a factor too, and it was that much harder to get over that hurdle to rehearse and practice and get to the point where he was happy with what he was playing on an album.
I think there's an interesting thing about the previous album, Man on the Rocks, that he did. It's kind of curious that that album was properly produced, and there were like, you know, studio musicians in Los Angeles recording it, and But if we go back listening to Mike's demos, we realize that all the guitar parts, even down to the strummed acoustic guitars, all the solos, everything is from his demos.
Mm.
Or let's say 98% of that is really from his demos. And so at the time I was thinking, okay, maybe really Mike doesn't really have that power or energy anymore to really redo parts even. Maybe he's kind of like has become the sort of first take kind of guy where you have to muster up all that energy to actually press record on the computer and start playing, and then you don't even want to go back because you can't believe that you can do better than you did. And that's certainly something that for Return to Ommadawn he'd have get over that again and actually practice. So there's been some effort, quite some effort in this record.
Now, Marcus, you mentioned Pro Tools, and Mike has spoken a little bit about using it on this record. He also said his goal was to keep mistakes within
Mhm.
it and not stamp out the humanity on the record, which, of course, many digital editing platforms so often enable. It's just such a temptation for musicians to sort of blend out the records using these tools. Do you feel Mike achieved his goal in that regard to make it feel like a very human project as opposed to a very overly produced one?
I think so. I think what is really great, what he did was just like in the old days where you had tape and you had to record a click track, like especially for the kind of work that Mike did, you had to have a reference point, right? So, but the click track back in the day was an actual metronome that you recorded, not an electronic click track. And that's what he brought back for Return to Ommadawn. At least that's what he says in the interview, and it makes total sense because you can hear that the timing of the click track of the is not constant. That sometimes slows down a little bit. And yes, I find it fascinating that he did that, and he also like you can tell like the edits aren't perfect. So just like they used to be not perfect in the analog world, but where the analog sound kind of smeared the bad edits, like the analog world made it easier to have bad edits, let's say, right? And there are quite a few kind of like not so great edits in his catalog even. But anyway, like with Return to Ommadawn, it's very obvious where he has not fixed things. And I think that's great. So yeah, I think it's pretty successful. There's actually this one section in side one where he's doing like this his the trick. It's a musical thing where he uses triplets and sixteenth at the same time, which feels very wonky because like it's two rhythms that are sort of interacting in an unexpected way. And then there's the metronome, which slows down a little bit. And I remember at the time when the album came out, there were some people that were complaining and saying that he couldn't even play in time anymore, which which is ridiculous because it's clearly intentional. And I mean, I couldn't believe that somebody would say that about Mike Oldfield, like this guy to put something on a commercially released product where he did not know what he was doing, but it's absolutely a wonderful moment where like everything is swimming and these and Chris, you know which section I'm referencing. I hope you know. It's like
Mm. Mm.
it's um it's so wonderful, and it's the kind of musical effect that completely got lost with digital production. Yes, and gridded music, and so yes, I think that Return to Ommadawn is really successful in doing that. The question of the overall sound, let's say, where it's like clearly a digital album, it doesn't sound like an analog album. That's a different question, but in terms of performance, I think it's very successful.
It's got an authenticity, hasn't it, of a real performance rather than
Yes.
something that is. I mean, we're in a world where auto-tune corrects singers and voices, and computers time everything to the millisecond. And we talked about Trevor Horn last time and his approach being so different. But contrasting that with the likes of Tom Newman as a producer who loves that authenticity, that real hand played feel, and you definitely get that in Return to Ommadawn. Yes, I have to agree.
Chris, I was shocked to hear that Tom had not listened to Return to Ommadawn.
Yeah, he said that. It may be that he just doesn't want to make a public comment about it, possibly.
Okay, okay.
Chris, just taking a brief tangent based on what Markus said, I'm curious, did Mike ever internalize fan feedback? Was that ever something he cared about, commented on? Did it affect him at all?
That's a really difficult question. So it kind of he always made out it didn't. So he kind of made out he just did his own thing and wasn't interested in what people said about his music. But I know that I know I've upset him about his music when Tubular Bells 2003 came out. Um, I was fairly scathing about it. You know, I kind of understood the reasoning for it, why he wanted to do it. But I kind of felt that fell into that trap of being a little bit too perfect. You know, the original Tubular Bells had all that angst in it. It had all that stress and pressure of getting it out, and that's kind of what made it what it was. And then when Tubular Bells 2003 came out, reworked, made perfectly, to me that kind of lost a lot of the edge of the original Tubular Bells, and I said so in a review. And I know that upset him. And so despite him saying, you know, I don't really kind of, I'm not interested in the feedback. I just make music because it's in me and it's got to come out, which I think is also largely true. I think he has been affected by feedback and reactions at times too. But you know, it's difficult to answer that authoritatively.
It's also very curious that he runs his own Facebook group with untold thousands of fans on it, and he, of course, only yearly posts a greeting or acknowledges his presence, but he's there and he's surely looking at what people say.
Well,
It's literally his group. He runs it.
Mhm.
yeah, well, you shoot me for saying this, but I'm not sure he does. I think he's got
Oh,
somebody helping me. I don't know, but I think he's got some help in doing that.
well, he's not doing much. So
Not now, not now.
the
I mean,
group
there
is
was
just
some,
sort of running unfettered and
yeah.
you know, monitored, really.
I mean, 10 years ago, there were some messages that were definitely from him, but then it kind of transitioned into, oh, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And what do you think? What's my favorite album? What's your favorite album of mine? And it kind of transgressed then into a bit of a kind of a marketing support, you know, just sort of keep a bit of interest in the channel and use that for that purpose. So, yeah, maybe I'm being a bit cynical, but I think he backed off that, lost interest in that relatively quickly, and I think somebody else has kind of helped him out with it from that point. But again, I am guessing.
Well, that dovetails nicely with the next question, which I wanted to explore the idea of this being practically a solipsistic event as a recording endeavor. Um, Completely solo, you know, he's sitting there in NASA, he's blocking out reality and society as he seems to be doing, you know, just with life in general. But he did all of that to achieve its aims. And do you both feel that that was a good or bad thing for this record, especially compared with Man on the Rocks, which had a very large cast of characters, even if they were remote?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm in a position to have a view on it. No, that's just kind of where he was in his life. He'd reached a point where he wanted to back away, and obviously since then he's just backed out completely. And good for him, you know, he's chosen to go into retirement and doesn't want to connect anymore, which is fine. You know, he deserves that retirement. He deserves that position in life he's worked to achieve. And with Return to Ommadawn, you know, he was just at that place where he didn't really want to collaborate, I don't think. Despite,
Well, but
sorry,
what's
go
your
on.
perspective musically, as it being a complete solo act compared to some of his
Yeah,
other
yeah.
long form records? Do you feel, can you hear that sort of
Oh,
solitary element on it?
absolutely. I mean, I think I'm right in saying it's the only time he's recorded and produced an album entirely on his own. Even back to Tubular Bells, where he was renowned for playing everything he didn't. There were other people involved, and you had a producer there. This time he's recorded it all himself on his own. He produced it himself. It's entirely his own work. And yeah, yes, you can, and I think that's really interesting to kind of see him absolute his absolute rawness, playing what he wants to do with no interference. But then that can also be seen as a negative. We talked about it last time with Amarok, that having a producer can help you kind of stretch yourself a little bit. And I do feel there's some themes in Return to Ommadawn that are so wonderful that they could have progressed a little bit more. And I know there are some people that feel a little frustrated that Return to Ommadawn didn't develop the themes enough for their liking. But
Mhm.
then that will be because he just did it on his own, and he decided that was enough, and then move on to the next part. So I think you can feel that, and it's a pro and a con at the same time.
And like some of the things that he used or sampled were from his own back catalog,
Hmm.
right? So, like I already mentioned, the voices, the original voices, and then there is the actually, I think two samples from Amarok, which is the ha 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 happy, the happy ha 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 is in there. There is one or two Boran loops from Amarok that he used, I think, on Return to Ommadawn. I actually, like as I was listening through an hour ago, I actually took notes, and I'm pretty certain that those are samples. We know that he has access to the multitracks for Amarok because at some point he said that he was working on the 5.1 remix. And Return to Ommadawn is sort of a, yeah, like we know for sure that he had those samples and he used them. And the on horseback vocals that he used, he brought back the choir, the children choir there, and also, and this is sort of like I think really a key point to this record. I'm not maybe I'm mentioning it now, is that we hear his voice, at the end where he says, "On horseback, I'd rather be here." And those are the last words we hear of him ever, it seems like, right? And I think again, it's like such a emotionally powerful, and like with all his work, like I'm still not sure if he has any idea that he's a great artist, artistic in the sense that he can kind of like plant these messages, in his own work. Um, not being aware if it's maybe he didn't even know. Well, we know that he started to work on Tubular Bells IV, right? But so somehow, like all of these things make sense in the end, and it's the last thing we hear, right? And hey, and away we go, and that's the end of the record. It ends, a little bit like one of the covers he made of the Vivaldi tune, like the Concerto in C or whatever it's called, or the William Tell Overture, really. Like the ending of Return to Ommadawn reminds me very much of those things he did in the 70s.
Mm.
And so really his goodbye in that regard is really also like how should I say, like very in terms of meaning, potential meaning, it's very nested, like there's this reference to classical music there. And yeah, I have to say I find that pretty fascinating. Like the whole record, the writing of the record is also like the melodies, the chord changes, like these things where like if you have music theory classes, right? And somebody would show you like the chord sequence of just the last section of Return to Ommadawn, people would say it doesn't make any sense. Like, does this chord change in the middle of the bar and the others don't? And they have no melody with themselves somehow. And but there's always something that draws everything together and makes everything so incredibly emotionally powerful, and it's kind of unpredictable on paper. You know, like you could look at the score
Mm.
and say, "Oh, this is nothing." Like, you know, arrogant people would say, "This is nothing," but then you listen to it and you start crying. You know, that's really was his forte. You know, all his career.
Well, his he mentions in his autobiography, Changeling, doesn't he, that his school teacher, no, even back then when he was in his teens, his school teacher used to chastise him for that very thing. No,
Hmm.
you can't put these chords together, and then you
Hmm.
play it and think, oh, oh, that really works.
Yeah,
The theory's wrong, but it just works, and he's got an ear for this beauty and this, and
yes.
it's what pricks your ears up because it's not the norm. It's not what you expect. It's something different, and it's
Hmm.
very creative in that respect, definitely.
Hmm.
I just mentioned about the sampling that you're talking about sampling, and I think actually I think the sampling was probably easy for him.
Hmm.
He wanted to be there working in Nassau. You say, I'd rather be here. I'd rather be here in the Bahamas, working on my own in my studio, doing my thing, no pressure, nobody to answer to. I don't want to go to London to go to a studio. I'm happy working here. And the samples were just there, so why not use those rather than getting a group of musicians together, trying to manage them? And he probably just reached a point where he couldn't be bothered with all that anymore. He just wanted to crack on and do it himself in the privacy of his own studio.
Absolutely. And I think that's also the where Tubular Bells 3 comes to mind, because that's where he did that, where he sampled, like, you know, used samples from his
Hmm.
own back catalog for those tunes. So, yeah.
I don't think he wrote it as a farewell though, because I think at the time, or not
Hmm.
consciously, because at the time he still had other plans,
Hmm.
and I don't think he intended that to be quite the farewell it turned into.
Hmm.
Uh, I'm sure we'll come on to that, but
Hmm.
I think there were still plans in him that didn't come to fruition.
Yeah.
And from a solo perspective, he also did his own surround mix for this record that came out on the limited edition. What are your thoughts, especially Marcus as a surround mixer yourself? What are your feelings on what he achieved with that surround project?
So first of all, like there were like some Chris, maybe you remember this, like some of the music leaked before, or there was a little snippet that was played on the BBC. That was like the first snippet I heard of the album. And it was actually a different version of the
Mm.
middle part of side two. Um, anyway, so I heard MP3s first. Then I heard an MP3 version of the whole album. Then I heard the 44.1 16-bit CD version. And then I heard the high-res version, files of the high-res version, and I have to say there really was and this is like really fascinating because normally I don't really care so much about these differences, but with Return to Ommadawn, the high-res version, the high-res download version of the stereo mix is really m much better than the CD version.
Mm.
There's something to be said about the way that he recorded it that translated better to the high res format. I don't know. Maybe he recorded it as high res. It's possible, quite possible that he did. Um, and then like the step from there going to the surround version, the 5.1 version it was, or it is. I listened to it a lot when it came out because it just worked really well. The and it more than that, it actually you could hear more parts. There's actually more happening than you're hearing in the stereo version. And um, a big problem with 5.1 mixes back at that time, not so much anymore with Atmos mixes now, but back in the day, it was really difficult to get a coherent sound because basically spreading out the material that can nicely be represented in stereo into like more onto more speakers and speakers in front and in the back of you, things can easily sound sort of like dislocated even, like kind of like as if you're pulling your hand off your wrist, that kind of effect. Some albums have that kind of, but this the sound of Return to Ommadawn and the 5.1 version is great because he sort of managed to to put things between the speakers, not so much like individual parts into individual speakers. And I did enjoy it, and I still do enjoy it quite a bit. I love it actually.
I mean, I love the crispness and the depth of the high res version. I think that does sound incredible. I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah,
Um, but you might be surprised to hear I've never actually heard the 5.1 mix. I've never invested in the equipment and
yeah.
I've never heard it. So one day
It's really
I'll
good.
have an
It's really
opinion.
good. And also, like going back to Anil's questions about the more analog approach also to editing and things, I think where in the stereo version, in the on the CD version, there are some moments where you could think that you're hearing a click, like a digital click or something, like a bad edit. In the high-res version, it really it's for I don't know why. It could be that a different guy mastered it or something and made even took the clicks out or something. I don't know. But that version really truly is superior to the CD version. I really think so.
Mm.
And then again, the surround version to me is wonderful and just sounds so warm. Like there's for some he managed to actually capture a warm sound. Um, yeah, which sorry, but like when I said warm, I was thinking about colors now. I was thinking about the cover, and I don't know what's next on the list, Anil. But at some point we need to talk about the cover.
Well, let's do that. My personal opinion is that is the weakest element of this album, the
Mhm.
cover art itself, after so many fascinating
Mhm.
pieces of album art that have accompanied his records. What are your thoughts, gentlemen, about the visual treatment and representation of it?
I mean, I've got to agree. I never it never struck a chord with me. Um, I don't know where it came from. I don't know who did it, but I know. I mean, there've been some fan art versions of it since that have kind of taken the idea and developed it, like added extra color to it, and even like, put Mike in it himself as well. And I feel they work better. I
Mhm.
feel like it was like maybe an idea that wasn't developed that well. I don't know. I'm probably being rude to the artist who did it, but no, it never struck a chord with me.
Mhm. I think it's Phil Smee who did it, um, who sort of was. I mean, probably Anil knows who that is, or I do not know really. But it was a person that was involved also with the re-releases, with the covers of the deluxe editions and things
Mm,
like that. So anyway, like the cover itself, like I have to say that yeah, I mean it's very strange where like the strangeness part of it is maybe even the thing that I enjoy about it, right? Like it's kind of it's strange and that would be fine. That would be okay. What really does not speak to me at all because I don't feel or hear it is the wintry, snowy feel of the depicted scene. That doesn't work for me, you know? Like, and Mike mentioned that as he was going back and forth with Phil Smee when they were working on this, that there was a wolf in it, and the wolf became a reindeer or something like that. Um, uh, for me, it just doesn't the cover doesn't like its strangeness kind of fits maybe the sadness and the vibe of the album somehow, but then the objects or like the scenery depicted for me doesn't fit with the feel of the music at all. It's a very curious artwork decision for sure.
It just felt very lazy to me.
Yeah, lazy. I mean, I I think technically that's not, it's not a lazy cover. It's somebody needs to actually make that illustration, and that takes time. So lazy is not the right word. Maybe not well curated. That's the word I would use, right? And this is where Chris, this is where a producer would have been welcome, as well as for the music, have a producer oversee this. And maybe Mike was just not interested in it anymore once he created the music or something and said, okay, like I just have to say yes or and like how it is with artists that are sort of like maybe moody or like then at some point
Mm.
you just
Lost interest.
lost interest, exactly. Yes. And yeah, I agree that that's sort of what it feels like. But then on the other hand, I like the detail that that Mike made photographs in the studio of the instruments he used, and like the artwork actually features
Mm.
real life photographs from that session. Which, like, on which other Mike Oldfield albums do we have that? We have that with Discovery. We have that on Exposed for sure, like all the tour photography, and then also, yeah, around the
5
mid
miles out.
5 months out and the
Mm.
775, like Ommadawn and the
Mm.
collaborations album, like we have like photographs from the studio and things like that. So it was really nice that he brought that back, and I think I haven't done that, but I would like to kind of like have a look at those pictures again and see if there's anything in there that I've missed in terms of things that he's been using, or musical instruments or even technological things. Um,
And they become quite poignant, really, because they're now amongst the last photos we're likely to see of him as well, aren't they? So quite
yes,
special in that respect as well.
yes.
Well, what do you both remember about how this record was received by fans in the media when it came out?
I think the reaction was great. I think it was fair. It was very positive. Um, I remember people talking about it, saying it's the best thing since Amarok, and the reaction was good, and it did well as a result of that. It got lots of coverage, lots of positive coverage. I think it was well deserved. I think it was a great album, and the reaction to it was very positive all round. I didn't see anything negative about it.
Same. I remember at that time I was already part of the Spanish Mike Oldfield groups on Facebook, because like we know how dedicated those people are. And for me, like their response was just like mine and yours, Chris, like so emotional.
Mm,
And they picked up on the sadness part of it, and it's for me it was really a very special time, because I think maybe I've mentioned that somewhere else, but when I first listened to the album, I was meeting Anil um, at some resort in Santa Cruz. Maybe you came and interviewed me and Pat Mastelotto, and I was very sick, and I was in bed. I was bedridden actually on that tour. I mean, on that weekend on that tour, and I listened to the album nonstop and just crying and crying. And I don't, I don't really understand how that really works. Why there's that connection that I make
mm,
with that guy's music. Because I certainly say that even though we talk about, yes, I'm a Mike Oldfield fan, but I'm really a fan of the music. Really, it's not really about the person. I've never met him. I always try to assume good things about him because that's how I am as a person, right? But it's really about the music. And yes, I remember those Spanish fans were going bonkers about this album being not just the best thing since sliced bread or Amarok, but
mm,
but ever. And I kind of agree that from a certain perspective, this album really is an incredibly powerful, amazing statement that again, like I'm not really 100% taken by everything on it or everything on it. It has weaknesses, but despite its weaknesses, the power that it has and the you
Mm.
know it's just in a positive way overshadowing the weaknesses. So it's great. Like I couldn't be happier that we actually got this album. Like I think it's a real gift to us. I don't want to say to humanity, but I really think it is. It's just wonderful.
Well, I think that's Mike Oldfield's gift in a nutshell, that he can take a feeling or a vibe, some kind of thing he wants to express and realize that in music. So he
Mhm.
doesn't struggle in turning that feeling into a piece of music. And he's done that so many times. And
Mhm.
that, I think, that really comes through here with Return to Ommadawn, that you've got this absolute sadness, this melancholy, and you just hear that when you listen to it, and that's what's left us in tears. I think that you kind of absorb that as you listen to the music, and you feel what he was feeling. He can't say it in words. He hasn't can't find the words to say it, but he gets it out and through in his music, and I think that's his gift, and that's what makes him remarkable, I think, in my mind.
Well, speaking of the reaction, you mentioned Spain, Marcus. The record did go to number one in Spain, number two in the Czech Republic, and number four in the UK. And a lot of that was on the basis of physical media sales. And of course, Mike said he also constructed this record for the reemerging vinyl format. Now, Man of the Rocks didn't achieve nearly that, despite being an overtly commercial record. I sort of found it fascinating that the long form was what got him to number one again and not the pop song.
Like Man on the Rocks, MOTR, middle of the road. I think that was also genius. I think it was genius to call that record that. But anyway, yes, I agree. Um, and somehow the return, right? The return to Ommadawn was really, the return is not to Ommadawn as the record or a place or something. Like Ommadawn, I think, was sort of like return to something, to a part of himself somehow, right? To the part of his personality or part of his artistic persona even. And yes, I think we can be. For me, it makes total sense that that would be more successful than making middle of the road pop songs, let's say, right? So
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think that's brilliant description of that. Yeah, it's
mhm,
what he's naturally best at,
yes.
and that's what people has resonated with people. I mean, I love Man on the Rocks too, and if I'm doing decorating or something, I'll always put it on, and I love some of the little flourishes in it. But it's a project set to deliver a different goal, but it's not his kind of natural goal of what he does best. And returning to that, people have responded to that.
Yeah, and let's not forget, like not a language specialist, but Ommadawn comes from the Amarok thing, like the fool, right? And in the original lyrics, it's sort of the fool of music would be the translation of the original uh, last phrase of that chanting on the original record, and so it could also be interpreted as like the return to the foolish or childish or not jaded, unjaded,
Uninhibited, yeah.
uninhibited, but also like really just that original energy, that original mojo or life energy that he had when he was doing those works. So even the form, I mean, I agree, it's great that he returned to that form, but I think really it's not so much about the form, it's about just the attitude, the vibe, and just allowing, as you say, Chris, like allowing to actually give us that message, that emotional message that for some reason he had to deliver, let's say, because that's how I see it. I don't think that it's a deliberate decision to make a sad record, right?
Mm.
Like, yeah, maybe within the context of the death of his child, yes, okay, but we don't know. We don't know that if that's really the emotion that's in there, like one to one, or if it's something else. But I think it's Yeah, I'm really grateful we have this record. I'm repeating myself, but I think that's what I am.
Absolutely.
Well, it's been somehow 9 years since this record came out. We've had a long time to process it. How would you two, Mike Oldfield experts, contextualize this long form piece within his other classic long form records?
I mean, I feel, without perhaps having intentionally been that way, it rounds off his career. I know we had the Tubular Bells IV demo afterwards. I kind of discount that in some regards, but I kind of view that as actually the end of his musical creativity and output. And I think in that respect, it's a great end piece to his musical career. Um, yeah, I love listening to it still. I don't it hasn't aged, and it's a wonderful, wonderful, unintentional farewell, I think, musically.
For me, what strikes me is like, my daughter is 6 years old now, and she obviously, because I listen to Mike Oldfield, and she learns the music, and she hums the long theme of Fergus Ridge, like, which is mind blowing to me, like these things. But um, I find that if I look back, and I do that with my podcast, I go through all the whole catalog, right? And I find that sometimes I'm just shocked with the fact that, okay, I can always tell it's Oldfield who's writing these melodies. For example, Taurus 2 from 5 Miles Out comes to mind, which has a total Oldfield vibe to it. But then if you hum the melodies and you sing along with them and you kind of like start looking closer, they are very, very different from melodies he's done until that point. Like it seems like a rediscovery of a certain or the musical approach. Or well, what I'm trying to say is the musical approach from album to album always was new. There was always something he managed to do
Mm.
that where he shuffled the cards anew, and and somehow with Return to Ommadawn, I don't really have an answer or an understanding yet about what really was happening there. And I think it's probably because the reference to Ommadawn with that theme, like I said, the themes that I mentioned, like the intro theme and the finale theme, it kind of for me it clouds my understanding of the uniqueness, let's say, of those melodies. In a way, they are more universally Oldfield than anything he's ever done before in the long form format, I think. And that's what kind of like striking to me is, and maybe speaks to what you said, Chris, that it's completely really maybe not, it didn't turn out to be the conceptual record that it could have been. It kept the name, it kept the motivation, let's say, and inspiration in places, but the result is really something quite different, as you say, because it's also emotionally so removed from the original Ommadawn.
Mm. Mm.
Well, as Chris mentioned, this, of course, wasn't necessarily supposed to be the bookend or his final statement. And Mike very enthusiastically trumpeted the fact that he was working on Tubular Bells 4 for a while. And of course, as you mentioned, all we ended up was with the short demo released on the 50th anniversary Tubular Bells reissue. Now, Mike has been completely silent on the situation, but let's just open this up to wild speculation and get your opinions on what you think might have happened here.
Well, there's obviously been some event that we don't know. We probably never will know. But we talked about dexterity earlier on. Maybe he just reached a point where the ideas in his head were more difficult to realize into the musical form. I really don't know, but I'm just guessing. Maybe there's something to do with health that has prevented him recording in the way he wanted to. I don't know, possibly. Who knows? We'll probably never know.
Yeah, Neil, we just don't know. And you know that we don't know. I just hope it's not like I was just reminded of our German Formula One guy, the Michael Schumacher guy, who had an accident and we've never seen his face since, right? He's still alive, but so so I really hope it's nothing like that. And Chris, you already said it before, like he deserves, his retirement. And if that's the
Absolutely.
retirement you want, if you want to be a recluse like that, it's fine. It's fine. It's kind of like the only thing that I still find sad is that, well, I have to relativize, it would be great if he had also been sort of teaching in some sort of way that was not just through his music. I mean, he's really like, the Spanish people, they call him the maestro, so he's the teacher, which means teacher in Spanish. So he really is the te big teacher through his music. I completely agree. But it would be so nice kind of to know more about his techniques, even just things like um, what kind of equipment was used and how things were recorded in the studio with albums like Crisis and stuff like that, 5 months out. Like, how was this actually done? All of these things that people could learn from, they are sort of lost also with him. And in Changeling, the autobiography, we all also know that, I can't even remember. He covered the album still like maybe platinum, maybe he talked about still for like a page, and then there was nothing really for those. And I think there's just a big gap in what we could have learned from him on the level that is not purely the music itself. And I find that a little bit sad. So that's sort of like the reason why I think I don't want him to make any more music. I don't want him to have to deal with fans, whatever. Like it's not about that. I think if there was if he would just leave us some more background information or I was even thinking about this, Chris, like at some point, like maybe we could make a list of people that worked with him that we could still talk to. And we could start talking to them and make interviews that are sort of like more focused on the things that we don't know rather than, repeating the things that we already know. I'd be up for doing something like that.
Yeah, I mean that's always been a goal of Dark Star, the magazine, really, is to try and get those backstories
Hmm.
and try to validate them as well. Because one of the things that's been difficult over the years is different people have different memories of exactly the same events. But once you get two or three people that remember the same thing in the same way, then you've kind of got a bit of authenticity there. Oh, well, maybe that is the way it happened, and the fourth person is the one that remembered it wrong. So that interesting. And
Yes.
yeah, there's a lot still to be gained and a lot still being uncovered from those kind of discussions.
Mhm.
Just one thing to add, I mean, we're talking about seclusion and retirement, and hopefully, he's found a different life. So he's kind of cut himself off from the musical life that he had and a musical history. Maybe he's having a lovely time there in the Bahamas with social friends, that they're nothing to do with music, just that don't see him as a musician, just as the guy from down the road who comes and has a pint. Hopefully he's found that happiness in his life, and I hope that's where he's at now.
What
It's
did you
fun. Sorry,
go
it's
on?
funny because I'm gonna be um, in Nassau with the Pro cruise in March. So
Oh,
it's gonna
close to the edge. Yeah,
yeah, it's gonna feel interesting to be close to his home.
yeah. Don't go knock on the door.
No, I will. I know. I don't think I'll go on the island. I'll stay on the boat anyway.
I'd love to go on that cruise. That looks amazing.
What did you both actually make of the Tubular Bells 4 demo track? Did it have a potential? Was this worthy of release? What do you think?
Well, look, I'm probably in a minority, but I found it quite disappointing. I think the Tubular Bells sequels have revisited Tubular Bells with fresh eyes, with creative brilliance. And for me, the Tubular Bells 4 demo felt like variations on a theme rather than another Tubular Bell. So I found it disappointing, but I know there are lots of people that do love it, so I think I'm in a minority on that one.
I mean, it's the question about potential. Yeah, it always has potential, you know. And I agree that maybe at that stage of his life, without a producer, let's say, or without a team that would support him, it would have been impossible to do an album that would be how shall I say worthy the title Tubular Bells 4. And maybe he realized that himself. In terms of like the writing, like the variation, I think I have an idea what he was trying to do, and there are certain interesting things there that I could mention. But I'm not going to bore people with it, like more of a from a musicologist standpoint. Um, I find that the very last little piano tune you hear in the demo incredibly emotional. Like it's so simple. It's even like more simple than anything on Return to Ommadawn. Um, and it's clearly they're just taking the a little motif that we've heard from him since the very beginning and turns that into a very simple emotional 4 bar piano loop, basically. And I'm not, talking about that last section where that fades out. Um, so I think there would have been a lot of potential in it for sure. Also, like if maybe you remember the early stages version of
Mm.
Sentinel, right? Where he was using like rhythm guitars in a very interesting way that he had never used in the big opening section of Tubular Bells. Then the Sentinel on Tubular Bells 2 did not have that. That was kind of like taken out, and we find these rhythm guitars in Tubular Bells 4. So just in terms of potential, I think it could have been interesting, like if he had, or if somebody had encouraged him to
Mm.
go the route and also to point out, no, Mike, this is cool. You've not done this before. Work with this. This is cool. In a way, maybe I don't know what Tom did for Mike, but that's sort of like how I would see the producer's role with him is to emotionally support the process and also to kind of like stick to an idea rather than getting to self conscious about things, because that's really what the demo sounds like, or that's maybe what we hear and that what we don't like about it is the fact that he's getting too self-aware about it, like brings up too many memories and also pressures to recreate something that sounds just like that. And if he had approached it with more freedom, I'm sure we would be more happy, Chris and Anil. Um, but I still think that there would have been potential with some sort of producer or team that would have supported the process.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting.
I also found it fascinating that some fans took this into their own hands. There's the famous gentleman who goes by the acronym JYF, who trained an AI model to build out a fully fleshed out version of Tubular Bells 4.
Mm.
Uh, have either of you heard what some of these fans have done, and what do you think of their take that, and it's not mine, by the way, that
Yeah.
AI could allow the Mike Oldfield compositional approach to live on for eternity?
I mean, it's horrible to me. I've heard it, and it's absolutely horrible. I think I think as a real fan, you just don't do that. You wouldn't do that. There are so many AI covers of Mike Oldfield tunes now on YouTube in particular, which are, yeah, maybe like for the first 10 seconds it's fascinating to hear something, and then clearly the AI doesn't know how to develop, like the AI doesn't make the same choices that Mike would have made, and not that we know what the choices are that he would have made really, but I think it's just a total no-go for me. and it does not speak to me at all, unfortunately, because um,
So I've not heard it, but I can imagine like the goal of an AI tool is to try and make something compliant with a kind of vision of how something is. But what creative people like Mike do is deviate from that norm. They're not kind of sticking to a pattern and an algorithm. They're going off the beaten path. They're exploring new ideas and in different ways. And that's something I think an AI tool would not be able to do. It's trying to bring itself back into an established pattern rather than diversify out from it. So and just the concept of AI trying to mimic an artist to me sounds alien. I mean, I think it's morally wrong anyway,
mm,
but just technically, I think it's doomed to failure.
I think as a creative tool, AI can be cool. Um, but when it comes to, this is really where the humanity kicks in, right? Like we really need morals and ethics about the use of AI. And that's
Mm.
really what this comes down to. Um, uh, yeah, I don't think I need to say more about that. I think it's wrong, and the results are just appalling, and like an insult to Mike. I mean, Chris, don't listen to it.
Well, as you said, it's not just that one. There's many others at this point as
Mm,
well, and no doubt there will be a tidal wave of those for eons to come.
mm.
Um, Well, I'd like to thank you both for your time on this. I think, my last question was originally, do you feel Return to Ommadawn serves as a decent bookend for his career? And I think you both already answered that. But do you have any other closing thoughts for viewers of this video regarding that or any other element of sort of this potentially being the closure of a phenomenal career?
All I'd say is I think it's a shame that he's just kind of faded away in the way he has. So we kind of learned retrospectively, 5 years after his retirement, that he'd retired. No, even running the fan magazine and getting access to information that snippet. Oh, by the way, he's retired, of course. Well, no. So
Mhm.
that was mentioned 5 years after the date where he was supposed to have retired. So it all happened very quietly, and he'll have his reasons for that. But I think in a way, it's a shame there wasn't a slightly more formal kind of farewell. His musical career just kind of faded away, and I'm sure there are reasons for that. But it would have been for the fans. I think they would have liked to have some kind of concrete bookend. I mean, I'm happy with how it's ended, and I think it's ended beautifully with a wonderful album. And we've got a huge catalogue of amazing music to continue enjoying. We've got all the memories of those of us that managed to see him play live. There are all the tribute acts that now play his music and keep that alive. So, no, I think he's left an amazing legacy. And thank you, Mike, for everything you've given us all.
Yeah, Chris, you've put it beautifully. For me, as a musician composer, I do want to honor what he did for me more. And this does not mean that I'm gonna make a version of Tubular Bells 4 or something. Uh, but really, I think in my upcoming work, I will honor that influence much more because I certainly always was very inspired, and the reason why I even became a musician is Mike's music. But um, especially with the AI thing, with the AI doom, um, we need to kind of see what the arts and Mike Oldfield's art, represents for us, and we try to do more of that, like keep going, and keep the spark, keep the love alive, and that's sort of like what I see from this, and listening to the end of Return to Ommadawn Part 2 really certainly leaves that wave of emotion with me, something that can be carried forward. You know, it's not something and this was always beautiful about his music, that really like the orgasm is not necessarily in the music, it's after. It's like you carry it with you, and the energy is stored in your body or in your mind, in your spirit, and can get released at some later point. And that's the feel. That's what Return to Ommadawn 2, Part 2 does for me, and that's why I couldn't be happier for having that as his last statement.
All right. Well, thanks to both of you. I really appreciate your time. This was an incredibly enlightening conversation.
Well, thanks for bringing us together, Neil. It's been a pleasure to talk.
Yeah, see you again soon, I hope.